Greetings. Tonight our topic is the continuing discussion of the Gospel of Thomas, verses 19 and 20. Unfortunately, Bishop Peterson is feeling under the weather this evening, and I was going to be joined by Deacon John DiGilio, but due to some technical difficulty, that's not possible as well. So you get to hear me kind of pontificate for a while with an occasional Father Tony joining in.
I'm not qualified, but I'll try my best.
Well, we've got two verses from the Gospel of Thomas. So let me go ahead and read these for our audience, and then we can get into some discussion, Father Tony. Right. Verse 19, Jesus said, "Blessed is he who was before he came into being. If you become disciples to me and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you. For you have 5 trees in paradise which do not change, either in summer or in winter, and their leaves do not fall. He who knows them shall not taste death." And then verse 20, the disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us what the kingdom of heaven is like." He said to them, "It is like a grain of mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, but when it falls on tilled ground, it puts forth a great branch and becomes a shelter for the birds of heaven." There we go. There's our two verses, and one of the first things I noticed on this, Father Tony, was kind of the reference that we almost see in Matthew 13:31 through 42, talking about the mustard seed, which is common in the Gospels. Mm-hmm. What I find interesting, though, in the whole entire, parable of the mustard seed is kind of several points. One is that the idea of something so small growing into this, great branch, as it says into this verse, which becomes the shelter for the birds of heaven. But it also implies that it has to fall upon soil that has been tilled. And if we take that as kind of a symbol, for ourselves, what does that mean for us? You think about what tilling does. It disrupts. You're disrupting. You're causing the soil to crumble underneath you. You're working that soil. So unless even of the smallest seed falls in something that has been disrupted and something that's been worked, is the seed going to grow?
It's very similar, very, very similar to what we talked about last week, where mm-hmm. there's a certain amount of preparation that you need to do in order for any of the spiritual work to actually be effective. Let's say you take a strict kind of Sethian dualist worldview. Mm-hmm. If we're all kind of these sparks of light mired in this matter that is imperfect or bad, depending on who you talk to, mm-hmm. then you need to do a significant amount of work to get your brain around all the day-to-day stuff that you always have to worry about, and to really focus on the more spiritual matters. And that, if you ask any beginning meditator, how difficult that kind of work can be, they'll tell you that most of the stuff that goes on in your brain is involuntary, and you have no way of, you have no control over your actual thoughts. Most of what we go about in day-to-day life is just reaction. Mm-hmm. Reaction to the stimulus, to, rehashing old conversations. What we should have said to that guy at the red light, or, mm-hmm. Oh, I really wish I had finished that project before I left the office, this kind of thing. So for me, that's that plowing. That's that, preparation work. It's mm-hmm. to figure out how to get yourself out of your own way when it comes to that kind of, mundane, materialistic thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good point. One of the things that I find kind of interesting is that used mustard seed, and then it's talking about becoming a great branch. Didn't talk about it becoming an oak tree, an olive tree, a great cedar, or any other great trees, but a mustard. Let me pull up my notes on this really quick. What I find interesting about this is that going totally off on a wild tangent on this one, but when you look at what the mustard plant actually is, the mustard plant in horticulture is really kind of a weed. It's a very small seed that will grow into a shrub, usually 3 to 4 feet tall. But it also has a tendency to take over where it's not wanted. It can get out of control. Yes, it can attract birds, but it's attracting birds sometimes then into cultivated areas where they're not necessarily desired to be. So, do we have something else that's really kind of being implied here? Tell us what the kingdom of heaven is like. He said to him, it's like a grain of mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, but when it falls on tiled ground, it can put forth a great branch and becomes the shelter for the birds of heaven. Is this also possibly a warning, or do you think that kind of putting a horticultural reference in this is reading possibly too much into this verse?
No, I don't think so at all, because I think that, the community that this came out of, this would have been an agrarian society. They would have been more intimately familiar with the way that various plants grow than we are today. I mean, I was as surprised as you to find out that mustard is such an aggressive plant, and actually pushes other things out of the way and gobbles up all the resources. And and I don't think that metaphor goes too far. I think that you can really look at it like this is a force all of its own. That, you're going to plant this tiny little seed, and it is going to grow and grow and grow and expand, and it's going to become like the one thing in the whole garden that you're going to have mustard for days. So I think it's an interesting comparison and an interesting kind of cultural observation as well. Because they did specifically pick mustard.
Yeah, I mean, out of all plants, why mustard? I mean, obviously, any of our listeners who have ever seen a mustard seed, it's extremely tiny. But I can think of other very tiny seeds as well. So, but yeah, I just thought that was kind of a interesting plant to pick, for that particular parable. Let's kind of jump back now, though, to verse 19 for a little bit here. Blessed is he who came. Blessed is he who was before he came into being. If you become disciples to me and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you. Again, for me, that kind of brings forth kind of Luke 19:40, where Jesus said, I tell you, if you become silent, the stones will cry out. Also, blessed is he who came into being. To me, that is sort of the one who has existed before all of creation. I mean, to me, it kind of points to kind of that Gnostic principle of the unknown Father.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note the similarities and differences between this and other canonical sources. That you see that in this edition, this version of it, it's pretty general. Blessed is he who was before he came into being. So this could be referring to anybody, where in some of the other canonical versions of this verse, it specifically refers to Jesus and only Jesus. You know what I mean? So there's kind of an implication, and this appears in Philip as well in a very similar form, that you see that there's an implication that whether or not you take the three Valentinian states of being as literal or figurative or stages of development rather than types of people, so that where you see that there are hylics and there are psychics and there are pneumatics. A literalist kind of view of that would say that all of these three types of people are predetermined before they were even born, and only the pneumatics are the ones who existed before they were born. You know what I mean? I think that we don't necessarily see Gnosticism or the world that way anymore. If anybody ever really did, it's tough to know what was a metaphor and what wasn't back then. So I guess my point is, in these verses, I think what they're trying to tell us is all of us existed before we came into being, and the process of Gnosis is the process of understanding that.
I think that's beautifully said. Very beautifully said. Let's get into the second part here. For you have 5 trees in paradise, which do not change, either in summer or in winter, and their leaves do not fall. He who knows them shall not taste of death. That set off lots of various things for me, including comparing it to kind of the 5 pillars of Islam, which I don't know if many of our listeners are familiar with the 5 pillars of Islam, but basically the first pillar would be declaring that there is no God except God. The second pillar would be that of ritual prayer 5 times a day. The third pillar, giving 2.5% of one's savings to the poor and to the needy. The sixth pillar is fasting and self-control during the holy month of Ramadan. And the fifth pillar is a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in one's lifetime, if one is able to. But yeah, the number 5 I find extremely fascinating. Being someone who besides being a Gnostic bishop, has been involved with many initiatory organizations. My first thoughts on this was, okay, 5, does it refer to the 5th Sephiroth? Are we talking about possibly the concept of Gevorah, which is the 5th of the 10 Sephiroth, and exactly what those attributes are for Gevorah? Any thoughts on whether you think there's some Kabbalistic symbolism in here, Father Tony?
It's tough to say because it depends on when you date the Kabbalah, right? I mean, certainly
Right.
there was pre-Kabbalah Jewish mysticism, and a lot of the ideas from the Kabbalah come directly out of that. So you'd probably see some connections there for our viewers who aren't necessarily as familiar with the Kabbalah. Can you talk a little bit about Gevorah and its symbolisms?
Sure. Gevorah is sometimes kind of understood as God's mode of punishing both the wicked. It's judgment against humanity in general. Some would, I guess, attribute it to kind of the idea of strength. Gevorah is, it says, what is the 5th utterance? 5th is the great fire of God, of which it says, let me see more of this great fire, at least I die. That comes from Deuteronomy 18:16. This is the left hand of God. Gevorah is associated with the soul and the power to restrain one's urge to bestow goodness upon others when that recipient of good is judged to be unworthy and liable to misuse it. Again, let me kind of go back to that concept. The innate urge to bestow goodness upon others when the recipient of that good is judged to be unworthy and liable to use it. Now, I think if we take that in kind of context of this particular verse, these 5 trees, which is in paradise, there's almost then kind of this implication that those who have been judged to kind of be worthy have now kind of entered into paradise, but you have basically maybe excluded those who have not been worthy, that have been deemed to be punished or wicked. However, we want to put that. I'm not going to necessarily put any form of standard morality on this. I think that implies something a lot more spiritual in nature. But I think that, anytime I look at, these types of verses, Tony, I mean, I try to look at them, not just kind of from a literal point of view, but I do try to look at them from a Kabbalistic point of view. I try to look at them on multiple levels to see, is there something kind of hidden in here? Because I think we have to look at kind of all sides of these verses to see, is there something hidden within its mist that is more than just kind of its literal meaning here? Because I think that obviously many of these things are, parables should be teaching a deeper meaning, and they need a lot of contemplation. And for me, one of the forms of that contemplation is definitely kind of pointing towards various Kabbalistic ideas.
Mm-hmm. I immediately think of, okay, I've got a lot of stuff here.
Fantastic. A lot of stuff is good.
So the 5 trees show up everywhere in Gnostic scriptures. It's in Epistis Sophia all over the place. It's in a couple of other places. But it's never ever explained. So this is probably one of those oral teachings that just the community would have recognized, but they didn't feel the need to explain. What does that mean? I don't know. Was it a part of an important ritual? Who's to say? But some people have likened the 5 trees to the 5 spiritual senses, right? That need to be refined in order to achieve gnosis and theosis and all that. Obviously, the number 5 has hermetic significances as well. So if you have the 4 classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and the 5th, which is the quintessence, the spirit. So that's obviously a very important number for for an esoteric spirituality as well. And interesting to know that their leaves don't change or don't fall, and whoever knows them will not taste death. There's a lot of not tasting of death in this particular document.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so they're unchanging, eternal trees, the 5 of them, and they're in paradise. So are they the 5 the 5 pairs of aeons that make up the decad, perhaps? I don't know.
And again, even going back to Kabbalah, we also have kind of the idea to the 5, various mystical, worlds within the Kabbalah. But yeah, there's a lot in here. Could it be, the body's 5, senses?
Yeah.
Which is basically, a kind of maybe possibly getting control over one's, lower ego and perceptions. Is that what's being referred to here? Many Gnostic.
Let's because we're running out of time here. I just noticed. So why don't we save some of that for the podcast, and we'll.
Fantastic. We'll get into that on the podcast then. Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for supporting us. Those who are Patreon supporters will get to listen to us live during the podcast. So that is kind of one of the perks for supporting the show. If you do enjoy our show and you find it helpful, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Gnostic. You can pledge a small amount per video or per podcast. You can put a cap to that amount. So if you want to give a certain amount per month and that's it, feel free to cap it at that. And that directly supports this program as well as the development of other programs. In some news, I'm going to plug Father Tony because he probably is not going to plug himself, but you can be joining Father Tony for the Voices of Modern Gnosticism Saturday, November the 8th, 2014. And they can find out information on that, Father Tony, at moderngnosticism.org, correct?
That's right, yeah.
And that is going to be in the Boston area. If my memory serves me, that's in Arlington.
Yeah, you're roboting a bit here, but yes, that's going to be in Arlington, Massachusetts, not very far from Alewife Station, if you're familiar with that. So while we get Bishop Canterbury back here, it's funny watching my screen here. At any rate,
is that the name?
Yeah, all right. So I guess I will close it out here then, and thank everybody for watching, and we'll catch those of you who are Patreon supporters in the podcast, and for everybody else, we'll see you next week.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.